CEO secretly checks his store and discovers the truth after seeing employees acting strangely. The soft hum of jazz music filled the air as William Hart stepped into the flagship store of Hart & Co., his world-renowned fashion brand. The store was a masterpiece of modern design: sleek glass walls, polished marble floors, and racks of elegant clothing that seemed to glow under the warm lighting. It was the kind of place that exuded sophistication, a reflection of the brand William had spent years building from the ground up. But today, as he walked through the doors, he wasn't here as the CEO. He was here as a customer, or at least, that's what he wanted everyone to think. Dressed in a worn leather jacket and a pair of faded jeans, William looked nothing like the polished executive who graced magazine covers and attended high-profile events. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and a simple scarf was wrapped loosely around his neck. He had deliberately chosen this casual look to blend in, to observe the store and its employees without the weight of his title looming over them. It wasn't the first time he'd done this. William believed that the best way to understand his business was to see it through the eyes of his employees and customers. But today something felt different. As he stepped further into the store, William's sharp eyes scanned the room. The atmosphere was as polished as ever, but there was an undercurrent of tension that he couldn't quite place. The sales associates moved with precision, their smiles practiced and professional, but one stood out to him immediately. A young woman at the register, her blonde hair pulled back into a neat ponytail, was struggling to maintain her composure. Her name tag read Sarah Collins. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she rang up a customer's purchase, her voice soft but strained as she thanked them for shopping at Hart & Co. William noticed the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, the way she kept glancing nervously toward the back of the store. It was subtle, but to someone as observant as William, it was impossible to miss. Something was wrong. He moved closer, pretending to browse a rack of scarves near the register. From this vantage point, he could see Sarah more clearly. Her cheeks were flushed and her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying recently. She wiped her hands on her apron, a nervous habit that only made her look more vulnerable. William felt a pang of concern. He didn't know her story yet, but he could tell she was carrying a weight far heavier than any employee should. "Excuse me," he said, stepping up to the counter with a scarf in hand. Sarah looked up, startled, and quickly forced a smile. "Welcome to Hart & Co.," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "How can I help you today?" William placed the scarf on the counter. "Just this, please," he said, his tone casual but warm. He watched as she scanned the item, her hands still trembling. "I'll be $85, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. William handed her a crisp $100 bill, but as she reached for the cash register, he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. For a moment, Sarah froze. Her blue eyes widened, and she looked at him as if she wasn't sure how to respond. She opened her mouth to say something, but then quickly closed it, shaking her head. "I'm fine," she said, forcing another smile. But the way she avoided his gaze told a different story. Before William could press further, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Sarah! Less chatting, more working. We have customers waiting." William turned his head toward the source of the voice. A man in his late 40s with a stern expression and a name tag that read Mark stood near the fitting rooms. His arms were crossed, and his tone was laced with irritation. Sarah flinched at his words, her shoulders hunching slightly as she mumbled an apology and quickly handed William his change. "Thank you for shopping with us," she said, her voice barely audible. William took the change, but didn't move. His eyes followed Sarah as she turned to help the next customer, her movements quick and efficient, but devoid of the warmth and confidence he expected from his employees. Mark, on the other hand, lingered near the fitting rooms, his gaze sharp and unyielding as he watched Sarah. There was something about the way he looked at her that made William's stomach twist. It wasn't just the usual tension between a manager and an employee. It was something deeper, something darker. William stepped aside, pretending to examine a display of handbags, but his attention remained fixed on Sarah and Mark. He watched as Sarah worked tirelessly, her interactions with customers polite but distant. She avoided eye contact with Mark, flinching slightly whenever he walked past her. The more William observed, the more certain he became that something was very wrong. By the time Sarah's shift ended, William had seen enough to know that this wasn't just a bad day for her. There was a pattern to her behavior, a quiet fear that spoke volumes. As she slipped off her apron and grabbed her coat, William made a decision. He wasn't just going to walk away. He was going to find out what was happening, and he was going to fix it. William Hart lingered in the store long after Sarah Collins had disappeared into the back room to end her shift. He wasn't sure why he felt so compelled to stay, but something about her demeanor, the way she flinched under Mark's sharp tone, and the sadness in her eyes had struck a chord deep within him. He had seen many employees over the years, but Sarah's quiet vulnerability was different. It wasn't just stress or fatigue. There was something more, something that made him uneasy. As he pretended to browse through a rack of coats, William's sharp eyes caught Mark pacing near the fitting rooms. The man's expression was stern, his lips pressed into a thin line, as he barked orders at another employee. William noticed how the younger staff members seemed to shrink in his presence, their movements hurried and nervous. Mark carried himself with an air of authority, but it was the kind of authority that bred fear, not respect. William's instincts told him to dig deeper. He wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, but years of running a business had taught him to trust his gut. Something was off, and he needed to find out what it was. A few minutes later, Sarah reappeared from the back room, her coat draped over her arm and her bag slung over her shoulder. She moved quickly, her head down, as if she were trying to escape unnoticed. William watched as she slipped out the side door, her figure disappearing into the cold evening air. Without thinking, he followed her. Outside, the city was alive with the sounds of traffic and the glow of streetlights. Sarah walked briskly down the sidewalk, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if to shield herself from more than just the chill in the air. William kept a respectful distance, not wanting to alarm her, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she needed someone to look out for her. After a few blocks, Sarah turned into a small cafe, its warm light spilling onto the street. William hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The cafe was cozy, with mismatched furniture and the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Sarah had taken a seat in the corner, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug as she stared out the window. She looked lost in thought, her expression a mix of exhaustion and sadness. William approached cautiously, clearing his throat to announce his presence. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice gentle. Sarah looked up, startled. For a moment she seemed unsure of what to say, but then she nodded. "Sure," she said softly, gesturing to the seat across from her. William sat down, studying her face. Up close he could see the faint traces of tears on her cheeks, the way her eyes were slightly puffy from crying. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. I noticed you seemed upset earlier. Are you okay?" Sarah hesitated, her fingers tightening around her mug. "I'm fine," she said quickly, but her voice lacked conviction. William leaned forward slightly, his tone earnest. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but I've been around long enough to know when someone's not fine. If there's something going on, maybe I can help." For a moment, Sarah didn't respond. She stared down at her coffee, her expression conflicted. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. "It's just work," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been hard lately." William nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Hard how?" he asked gently. Sarah hesitated again, as if weighing whether or not to trust him. "It's Mark," she admitted finally, her voice trembling. He's not a good manager. He's always watching me, criticizing everything I do. It doesn't matter how hard I try, it's never good enough for him." William's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "That sounds awful," he said. "Has he always been like that?" Sarah nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "It's been getting worse lately. He's always finding reasons to yell at me, to make me feel like I'm not good enough. And it's not just me, he's like that with everyone. But I feel like he singles me out more than the others." William's heart ached at the pain in her voice. "Have you talked to anyone about it? HR, maybe?" Sarah shook her head. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Mark has been with the company for years. He's close with some of the higher-ups. I don't think anyone would believe me, and even if they did, I'm afraid of what he might do if he found out I said something." William felt a surge of anger, not at Sarah but at the situation. He had built Hart & Co. on the principles of respect and integrity, and the thought of one of his employees being treated this way was unacceptable. But he knew he couldn't reveal who he was, not yet. He needed more information. After their conversation, William walked Sarah to the subway station, promising her that things would get better. "You're stronger than you think," he told her, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." As she disappeared down the stairs, William made a silent vow to get to the bottom of this. The next morning, he returned to his office and began his investigation. He started by reviewing the employee records for the flagship store. Mark's file was extensive, filled with glowing performance reviews and commendations from previous managers. But as William dug deeper, he found a troubling pattern. Several employees had left the store abruptly over the years, citing personal reasons in their exit interviews. It was too much of a coincidence. Next, William requested access to the store's security footage. As he watched the recordings, his suspicions were confirmed. Mark's behavior towards Sarah was far from professional. He was constantly hovering over her, criticizing her work, and even invading her personal space. In one clip, William saw Mark grab Sarah's arm during a heated exchange, his grip firm enough to make her wince. The sight made William's blood boil. But it wasn't just Sarah. The footage showed Mark treating other employees with the same harshness. Though his focus on Sarah was undeniably more intense, William couldn't understand how this had gone unnoticed for so long. He felt a pang of guilt. He had trusted his managers to uphold the values of his company, and now he realized that trust had been misplaced. By the end of the day, William had gathered enough evidence to take action, but he knew he couldn't rush into this. He needed to handle the situation carefully, not just for Sarah's sake, but for the sake of the entire team. He decided to visit the store again, this time as himself. When he arrived the next morning dressed in his usual tailored suit, the staff's reaction was immediate. Whispers spread through the store as employees recognized him, their expressions a mix of surprise and nervousness. Mark, however, seemed unfazed. He approached William with a confident smile, clearly unaware of what was about to happen. "Mr. Hart," Mark said, extending a hand. "What a surprise to see you here. Is there something I can help you with?" William shook his hand briefly, his expression unreadable. "I'm here to observe," he said simply. "Carry on as usual." As Mark returned to his duties, William's eyes sought out Sarah. She was at the register again, her movements quick and efficient, but there was a tension in her posture that hadn't been there before. When their eyes met, she looked away quickly, as if afraid to acknowledge him. William's resolve hardened. He wasn't just here to observe. He was here to make things right. William Hart stood near the entrance of the flagship store, his sharp eyes scanning the room. The tension in the air was palpable, and he could see it in the way the employees moved, hurried, cautious, and careful not to draw too much attention to themselves. Mark, the store manager, was pacing near the fitting rooms, barking orders at a young associate who looked like she was on the verge of tears. William's jaw tightened. He had seen enough. But before he could act, his gaze shifted to Sarah Collins. She was at the register again, her hands moving quickly as she rang up a customer's purchase. Her face was calm, but William could see the strain in her eyes, the way her shoulders tensed every time Mark walked past her. It was as if she were bracing herself for another reprimand, another cutting remark. William's heart ached for her. He had spent years building Hart & Co. into a brand that valued its people as much as its products, and seeing one of his employees treated this way felt like a personal failure. But he knew he couldn't confront Mark in the middle of the store. Not yet. He needed to handle this carefully, for Sarah's sake and for the sake of the other employees. Later that evening, William waited outside the store, leaning casually against a lamppost as the employees began to leave. One by one, they filed out, their faces tired but relieved to be done for the day. Finally, Sarah emerged, her coat wrapped tightly around her as she stepped into the chilly night air. She didn't notice William at first, her head down as she walked toward the subway station. "Sarah," William called out, his voice gentle but firm. She stopped abruptly, turning to face him. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw him, and for a moment, she looked as if she might run. But then she seemed to recognize the kindness in his expression, and her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Mr. Hart," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" William stepped closer, his hands in his pockets to appear less intimidating. "I wanted to talk to you," he said. "Do you have a moment?" Sarah hesitated, glancing around nervously. I guess so," she said finally. William gestured toward a small cafe across the street. "Let me buy you a coffee," he said. "I promise, I won't take up too much of your time." After a moment's hesitation, Sarah nodded. Together, they crossed the street and entered the cafe, the warm light and comforting aroma of coffee providing a stark contrast to the cold night outside. They found a quiet corner table, and William ordered 2 cups of coffee before turning his attention back to Sarah. For a while they sat in silence, the only sound between them the clinking of cups and the soft hum of conversation from the other patrons. William didn't want to push her, so he waited patiently, giving her the space to speak when she was ready. Finally, Sarah let out a shaky breath. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care?" William leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "Because I've been watching," he said. "I've seen how Mark treats you, how he treats the other employees, and I can tell it's not right." Sarah's eyes filled with tears and she quickly looked away, wiping at her face with the sleeve of her coat. "It's not just me," she said quietly. "He's like that with everyone. But I feel like he's harder on me than the others, like he's trying to break me." William's chest tightened at her words. "Why do you think that is?" he asked gently. Sarah hesitated, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe because I don't fight back. I can't afford to lose this job. I need the money to help my mom. She's been sick and the medical bills are piling up. I can't risk making things worse." William felt a surge of anger, not at Sarah but at the situation. No one should have to endure what she was going through, especially not someone as kind and hard-working as her. "You shouldn't have to put up with this," he said firmly. "No one should." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and fear. "But what can I do?" she asked. "Mark's been with the company for years. He's close with some of the higher-ups. If I say anything, he'll just find a way to get rid of me." William reached across the table, placing his hand gently over hers. "You're not alone in this," he said. "I promise you, things are going to change." As the evening wore on, their conversation shifted from work to more personal topics. Sarah told William about her mother, about how she had been diagnosed with a chronic illness and how Sarah had taken on extra shifts to help pay for her treatment. She spoke about her dreams of one day opening her own boutique, a small shop where she could design and sell her own clothing. William listened intently, his admiration for her growing with every word. She was strong, resilient, and passionate, despite everything she had been through. And yet, there was a vulnerability to her that made him want to protect her, to shield her from the hardships of the world. For the first time in years, William felt a connection that went beyond the professional. He had always kept his personal life separate from his work, but with Sarah it was different. There was something about her that drew him in, something that made him want to be more than just her boss. As they left the cafe, William walked Sarah to the subway station. The streets were quiet now, the city settling into the stillness of the night. When they reached the entrance to the station, Sarah turned to him, her expression soft but uncertain. "Thank you," she said, "for listening, for caring. I don't know why you're doing this, but it means a lot." William smiled, his eyes warm. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "You deserve better, Sarah, and I'm going to make sure you get it." For a moment, they stood there in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions. Then, before she could say anything else, Sarah turned and disappeared down the stairs, leaving William standing alone on the sidewalk. The next morning, William returned to his office with a renewed sense of purpose. He spent hours reviewing employee records, exit interviews, and security footage from the flagship store. The more he uncovered, the angrier he became. Mark's behavior wasn't just unprofessional, it was abusive, and it had been going on for far too long. But William knew he couldn't act impulsively. He needed to handle this carefully, not just for Sarah's sake, but for the sake of the entire team. He decided to visit the store again, this time as himself. When he arrived dressed in his usual tailored suit, the reaction was immediate. Employees whispered to one another, their eyes wide with surprise as they recognized him. Mark, however, seemed unfazed. He approached William with a confident smile, clearly unaware of what was about to happen. "Mr. Hart," Mark said, extending a hand, "what a surprise to see you here. Is there something I can help you with?" William shook his hand briefly, his expression unreadable. "I'm here to observe," he said simply. "Carry on as usual." As Mark returned to his duties, William's eyes sought out Sarah. She was at the register again, her movements quick and efficient, but there was a tension in her posture that hadn't been there before. When their eyes met, she looked away quickly, as if afraid to acknowledge him. William's resolve hardened. He wasn't just here to observe, he was here to make things right. William Hart stood in the flagship store of Hart & Co., his heart racing as he prepared to confront Mark. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had gathered enough evidence to take action, and now it was time to put an end to the toxic environment that had plagued his store for far too long. As he observed the employees bustling about, William's gaze fell on Sarah. She was at the register, her movements quick and efficient, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she flinched whenever Mark walked past. It broke his heart to see her like this, and he knew he had to act decisively. "Mark!" William called out, his voice firm but calm. The store manager turned, his expression shifting from surprise to a forced smile as he approached. "Mr. Hart, what a surprise to see you here," Mark said, his tone overly cheerful. "Is there something I can assist you with?" William took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Yes, there is. I'd like to speak with you in private, now." Mark's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly masked it with a nod. "Of course, right this way." William followed Mark to a small conference room at the back of the store. The walls were adorned with fashion sketches and inspirational quotes, but the atmosphere felt stifling. As soon as they were inside, William closed the door behind them, his expression serious. "Sit down," he instructed, gesturing to the chairs around the table. Mark complied, his demeanor shifting from confident to wary. "What's this about?" Mark asked, crossing his arms defensively. William leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "I've been reviewing the employee records and security footage from this store. I've seen how you treat your staff, particularly Sarah." Mark's expression hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about. I run a tight ship, and that's how it should be." "A tight ship," William echoed, his voice rising slightly. "You're bullying your employees, Mark. I've seen the way you speak to them, the way you intimidate them. It's unacceptable." Mark scoffed, rolling his eyes. "They need discipline. If they can't handle the pressure, they shouldn't be working here." William's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "Discipline is one thing, harassment is another. I've seen the footage, Mark. I've seen how you single out Sarah, how you grab her arm, how you humiliate her in front of customers and staff. That's not leadership, it's abuse." Mark's face turned red, his confidence faltering. I don't know what you're talking about. Sarah's just sensitive. She overreacts to everything." William's voice grew colder. "This isn't about Sarah overreacting. This is about you abusing your position of power. And it's not just her, you've created a toxic environment for the entire team. Employees are afraid to speak up because they think no one will believe them, but I believe them, Mark. And I've seen enough." Mark's eyes darted around the room, searching for a way out. "Look, Mr. Hart, I've been with this company for years. I've always done what's best for the store. Maybe I've been a little harsh, but it's only because I care about the business." William shook his head, his expression unwavering. "If you cared about the business, you'd treat your employees with respect. They are the heart of this company, Mark. Without them, we're nothing. And you've been tearing them down instead of building them up." Mark opened his mouth to argue, but William cut him off. "This ends today. You're fired, effective immediately." For a moment there was silence. Mark stared at William, his face a mix of shock and anger. "You can't do this," he said finally. "I've given everything to this company." "And you've taken more than you've given," William replied. "You've taken their confidence, their sense of safety, their trust. That's not the kind of leadership we stand for at Hart & Co. Security will escort you out. You'll receive your final paycheck within the week." Mark stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice low and venomous. But William didn't flinch. "No, Mark," he said calmly. "The only thing I regret is not stepping in sooner." After Mark stormed out of the store, escorted by security, William gathered the remaining employees in the break room. The atmosphere was tense, the staff exchanging nervous glances as they waited for him to speak. "I know this has been a difficult time for all of you," William began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've seen the way Mark treated you, and I want to start by saying I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I didn't see it sooner, and I'm sorry that you had to endure it for as long as you did." The employees looked at him, their expressions a mix of relief and disbelief. Sarah stood near the back of the room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as if she were trying to hold herself together. "This is not the kind of workplace I want Hart & Co. to be," William continued. "You deserve to feel safe, respected, and valued, and I promise you, from this day forward, things are going to change." He paused, letting his words sink in. "If any of you ever feel like you're being mistreated, I want you to know that my door is always open. You can come to me directly and I will listen. No one should ever feel afraid to speak up." The room was silent for a moment, and then one of the younger employees, a sales associate named Mia, spoke up. "Thank you, Mr. Hart," she said, her voice trembling. "It means a lot to hear you say that." William nodded, his gaze sweeping over the group. "You're the heart of this company," he said, "and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you know that." Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere at the flagship store began to shift. Without Mark's oppressive presence, the employees started to relax, their smiles becoming more genuine and their interactions more positive. Sarah, in particular, seemed to blossom. She still carried the weight of her past experiences, but there was a newfound confidence in the way she carried herself, a spark of hope that hadn't been there before. One afternoon, as William was visiting the store to check in on the team, Sarah approached him. She looked nervous but determined, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Mr. Hart," she said, her voice steady, "can I talk to you for a moment?" "Of course," William said, gesturing for her to sit with him at one of the small tables in the store's cafe area. "What's on your mind?" Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his. "I just wanted to thank you," she said, "for everything. For listening to me, for believing in me, and for making things better here. It means more than I can say." William smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You don't have to thank me, Sarah. You deserved better. And I'm just glad I could help." She hesitated, her expression turning more serious. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about not letting anyone make me feel small, and I've decided it's time for me to move on." William's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Move on?" he asked gently. Sarah nodded. "I've loved working here, and I'll always be grateful for the opportunities I've had, but I think it's time for me to take a chance on myself. I want to start my own boutique, like I've always dreamed of. It's scary, but I think I'm ready." William's chest tightened with a mix of emotions: pride, sadness, and admiration. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he said. "You're talented, Sarah, and I have no doubt you'll be successful. If there's anything I can do to help, just say the word." Tears filled Sarah's eyes, but she smiled. "Thank you," she said. "That means so much to me." As they stood to say goodbye, William felt a pang of sadness. He had grown to care for Sarah, not just as an employee, but as a person. But he knew this was the right decision for her, and he couldn't be prouder. In the months that followed, William made it his mission to ensure that every Heart & Co. store upheld the values he had always envisioned for the company. He implemented new training programs for managers, created anonymous reporting systems for employees, and made regular visits to stores to connect with the staff personally. As for Sarah, she went on to open her boutique, a small but thriving shop that quickly gained a loyal following. William visited her store one day, not as a CEO but as a friend, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as he watched her greet her customers with the warmth and confidence he had always known she was capable of. In the end, the experience changed both of them. For William, it was a reminder of the importance of staying connected to the people who made his company what it was, and for Sarah, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she could finally take control of her own destiny. William Hart stood outside the small boutique, a soft smile playing on his lips as he gazed through the large glass window. The sign above the door read, "Sarah's Haven," a simple yet meaningful name that perfectly captured the essence of the shop. Inside, racks of beautifully designed clothing were neatly arranged, and the warm glow of soft lighting created an inviting atmosphere. Customers moved in and out, chatting happily while Sarah stood near the counter. Her face lit up with a radiant smile as she helped an older woman choose a dress. Taking a deep breath, William pushed open the door, the soft chime of the bell announcing his arrival. The sound caught Sarah's attention, and when she looked up and saw him, her eyes widened in surprise before a bright smile spread across her face. "Mr. Hart," she exclaimed, walking toward him with an energy that was both excited and genuine. "I didn't expect to see you here today." William returned her smile, his eyes filled with pride. "I wanted to see the shop for myself," he said, glancing around the boutique. "And I have to say, Sarah, it's incredible. You've done an amazing job." Sarah blushed slightly, but her smile didn't waver. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a lot coming from you." William took a moment to admire the space. The boutique was small, but thoughtfully designed, with every detail reflecting Sarah's unique style and vision. The walls were painted a soft, calming shade of cream, adorned with framed sketches of her designs. A cozy seating area in the corner invited customers to relax while they shopped, and the air was filled with the faint scent of lavender. It was clear that Sarah had poured her heart and soul into this place. "I can see how much love you've put into this," William said, his voice warm. "It's not just a store, it's a reflection of who you are." Sarah's eyes glistened with emotion, and she looked down for a moment, as if trying to gather her thoughts. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said finally, her voice steady but filled with gratitude. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You gave me the courage to take this leap." William shook his head gently. "You had that courage all along, Sarah. I just helped you see it." As they stood there, the boutique bustling around them, Sarah gestured toward a small table near the seating area. "Would you like to sit for a bit? I'd love to catch up." William nodded and they made their way to the table. Sarah brought over 2 cups of tea, setting one in front of him before taking a seat across from him. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the hum of the boutique providing a soothing backdrop. "I still remember the day you came to talk to me outside the store," Sarah said, her voice soft but steady. "I was so scared. I thought you were going to fire me, or worse, tell me that I wasn't good enough. But instead, you listened. You cared. No one had ever done that for me before." Willem's expression softened. "You deserve to be heard, Sarah, and you deserve to be treated with respect. I'm just sorry it took me so long to see what was happening." Sarah shook her head. "You did more than enough. You stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself, and because of that, I'm here now. I'm living my dream." William smiled, his chest swelling with pride. "And you're doing it beautifully," he said. "This place is everything I knew it would be and more." As they continued talking, the door to the boutique opened, and a familiar face walked in. It was Mia, one of the younger employees from the flagship store. She looked around in awe, her eyes lighting up when she spotted Sarah and William. "Sarah," Mia called out, hurrying over. "This place is amazing. I've been meaning to stop by, and I'm so glad I finally did." Sarah stood to greet her, pulling her into a warm hug. "Mia, it's so good to see you. How have you been?" Mia grinned. "Better, now that things at the store have changed. It's like a whole new place without Mark. Everyone's happier, and we're actually working as a team now." William, who had been quietly observing the exchange, felt a sense of satisfaction. Hearing that the changes he had implemented were making a difference only reinforced his belief in the importance of strong, compassionate leadership. Mia turned to him, her smile widening. "Mr. Hart, I just want to say thank you for everything. You didn't just save the store, you saved us." William nodded, his voice humble. "You all deserved better. I'm just glad I could help." Mia stayed for a while, chatting with Sarah and admiring the boutique. Before she left, she turned to Sarah with a playful smile. "You're an inspiration, you know that? One day, I hope I can do something like this." Sarah laughed, but there was a sincerity in her voice when she replied, "You can, Mia, and when you're ready, I'll be here to cheer you on." As the day went on, the boutique grew quieter, and soon it was just Sarah and William left. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow through the windows. Sarah walked William to the door, her expression thoughtful. "Mr. Hart," she said, her voice soft. "I don't think I've ever properly thanked you, not just for what you did for me, but for what you taught me. You showed me that it's okay to stand up for myself, to believe in my own worth. That's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life." William looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of pride and affection. "You don't have to thank me, Sarah. Watching you grow, seeing you succeed, that's all the thanks I need." They stood there for a moment, the weight of their shared journey hanging in the air. Finally, Sarah smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You're a good man, Mr. Hart, and I'll never forget what you've done for me." William reached out, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "And I'll never forget you, Sarah. You've reminded me why I started this company in the first place. It's not about the clothes or the profits, it's about the people." With that, he stepped outside, the cool evening air wrapping around him. As he walked away, he glanced back one last time, watching as Sarah turned the sign on the door to "Closed." She caught his eye through the window and waved, her smile as bright as ever. William smiled back, his heart full. He knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. And as he walked into the fading light, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to continue building a legacy that truly mattered. As William Hart reflected on the events that had unfolded over the past few months, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude and growth. The experience with Sarah and the toxic environment at the flagship store had been a wake-up call, not just for his company but for himself as a leader. It had reminded him of the values he had built Hart & Co. upon, and the importance of staying connected to the people who made the company what it was. One of the most profound lessons William learned was the importance of listening. For years he had trusted that his managers were upholding the company's values, but he had failed to truly listen to the voices of his employees. It wasn't until he stepped into their world, observing their daily struggles and hearing their stories, that he realized how much he had missed. Sarah's courage to open up to him had been a turning point, and it taught him that leadership isn't just about making decisions from the top. It's about being present, approachable, and willing to hear the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Another key lesson was the power of empathy. Watching Sarah endure Mark's mistreatment had been painful, but it also opened William's eyes to the resilience and strength of his employees. Sarah's story wasn't just about one person. It was a reflection of the challenges many employees face in toxic workplaces. By putting himself in her shoes, William was able to see the impact of his decisions on a personal level. This empathy drove him to take action, not just for Sarah, but for the entire team. It reminded him that true leadership is about lifting others up, creating an environment where they can thrive, and ensuring that no one feels powerless or unheard. The experience also reinforced the importance of accountability. William realized that, as the CEO, the responsibility for the company's culture ultimately rested on his shoulders. While it was easy to blame Mark for the toxic environment, William knew that his own inaction had allowed it to persist. This realization pushed him to take a hard look at the systems and structures within Hart & Co. He implemented new policies to ensure that employees had safe and anonymous ways to report issues, and he made it a priority to personally visit stores and connect with staff on a regular basis. By holding himself accountable, William set an example for his entire organization, showing that no one is above the values they claim to uphold. One of the most inspiring lessons came from Sarah herself. Her journey from a timid, overworked employee to a confident business owner was a testament to the power of belief. When William first met Sarah, she doubted her own abilities and felt trapped in her circumstances. But with a little encouragement and support, she found the strength to pursue her dreams. Watching her transformation reminded William of the incredible potential that lies within every individual. It also reinforced his belief that a leader's role is not just to manage, but to inspire, to help others see the greatness within themselves and give them the tools to succeed. For William, the experience also highlighted the importance of culture. A company's culture isn't just about mission statements or slogans. It's about the everyday interactions, the way people treat each other, and the environment leaders create. Mark's behavior had been a stark reminder of how quickly a toxic culture can take root if left unchecked. But it also showed William how powerful a positive culture can be. After Mark's departure, the flagship store transformed into a place of collaboration, respect, and genuine care. Employees who had once been afraid to speak up began to share ideas, support one another, and take pride in their work. It was a reminder that culture isn't just a nice-to-have, it's the foundation of a successful business. Finally, William learned the value of taking action. It wasn't enough to recognize the problem he had, to do something about it. Confronting Mark had been difficult, but it was necessary, and while it was tempting to focus on the potential risks, how firing a longtime manager might disrupt operations or create backlash, William realized that doing the right thing often requires courage. By taking decisive action, he not only protected his employees, but also sent a clear message about the kind of company Hart & Co. aspired to be. As William looked back on the journey, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The experience had reminded him why he started Hart & Co. in the first place, not just to sell clothes, but to create something meaningful, something that made people's lives better. He knew that the lessons he had learned wouldn't just shape his company, they would shape him as a leader and as a person. For other leaders, William's story serves as a powerful reminder. Success isn't just about profits or growth, it's about people. It's about creating a workplace where employees feel valued, respected, and empowered. It's about listening, empathizing, and taking action when things go wrong. And most importantly, it's about never losing sight of the values that define who you are and what you stand for. In the end, William realized that leadership is a journey, not a destination. There will always be challenges, mistakes, and opportunities to grow. But as long as you lead with integrity, compassion, and a commitment to doing what's right, you can create a legacy that truly matters. The story of Hart & Co. is proof that change is possible, but it starts with us. Let's create workplaces where kindness, respect, and integrity are the foundation. Let's build a world where everyone feels valued and empowered to reach their full potential. And let's remember that, at the end of the day, success isn't just about what we achieve, it's about how we make others feel along the way.